Hello. I hope you've all had a lovely day today and have been enjoying the beautiful May weather. My name is Erin McCluskey. Hello. I'm not going to be presenting on my own tonight. I have a colleague to introduce. Hi, Kristers. How are you? Could you tell us who you are? Yeah, my name is Kristers Lukins, and I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Group, just like you, Erin. So we're both members of the Youth Advisory Group, which is part of the Deaf Roots and Pride project. And we also have another guest to introduce. Natalie, could you join us?
Hello everyone.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
My name's Natalie Greenall, and I'm a mum of two boys, 7 and 5.
Lovely. And that brings us to the topic for this evening, which is parents' experiences with deaf education. Now, we have talked about deaf education in relation to young people, so those kind of comments might come in as well. Kristers, do you want to kick us off? Yeah, hi, Natalie. I just wondered what you felt about your children's experience of education. Is it positive, or what can you tell us about that?
Overall, so my son's 7, he's still early years, but at the moment I feel his education has been good, really well provided for. In nursery, there were some really great areas, some that needed a bit more work and support, but they were excellent. They were really excellent at the nursery, and his school's great too.
So your boy's 7, and what kind of support does he get from primary school?
Well, I'll focus on my 7-year-old because my 7-year-old's deaf, my 5-year-old is hearing.
Okay.
So my 7-year-old has a full-time teacher of the deaf who supports him all day. And there's also a PSA that comes in as well.
And could you tell us what PSA means, Natalie?
Pupil Support Assistant.
Ah, great.
So, for example, if there's any issues through school or they're needing to transition to different rooms, if he's getting ready for maybe a PE class, etc., sometimes it can be a wee bit overwhelming. He might need to leave the class, so the PSA would go with my son. Both of them use British Sign Language, so he has full communication, which is wonderful.
Well, that's terrific support, and that's so important, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that nurseries should also provide that kind of support for parents as well, or just for pupils?
Well, the last time when the government gave 30 hours of childcare, prior to that, my child was only going in the mornings. So he started when he was 2 because we were both deaf parents, and so they got extra support, were able to start earlier. Most young children starting at the age of 3. Now, he started going Monday to Thursday, but there was only communication for 40 minutes. And so it wasn't great because my son was deaf and all the other children were hearing. He felt quite isolated in that situation. And so the nursery were trying to get the right balance because they didn't want to have an adult with him all the time. They wanted to give him enough time to play and have his free time, but also give him support with communication. So we kind of played with that a little bit. We then moved to a different school. When he was 3, moved to the school nursery, and we got 1.5 hours out of a 3-hour day, which was better with communication support. Better than nothing, certainly. I would have preferred the communication support to have been there all the time.
Sure.
My son was in nursery. Like, for example, nursery, like the communication support was only there part of the day and rather than the whole session. It would have been better having them full time, which meant, if he was playing, then the support assistant wouldn't need to be there. But if there was wanting some communication put in place, they could be there to do that. But overall, it was very good. What was important was there was communication support, and that person was a deaf person. So my son had a role model, an adult role model, to understand that there are other deaf role models out there. So it was really nice to have that. They had a great bond and a great relationship together. They signed with each other. So I really appreciated that. It was wonderful.
So important to have that role model as part of that experience. So important to have a deaf person on board. But before we continue, I'm afraid I forgot to say to our audience, you are very, very welcome to send in comments and questions, which we'll pick and introduce into the chat. Kristers, do you want to add anything to that? Okay, great. So let's continue with the questions for Natalie then. So Natalie, you've told us about preschool, but in terms of the support for you as parents, do you have you been able to get involved with parents' councils and meetings and that sort of thing?
They've asked me to be involved, but I usually say no. Because I would be the only deaf person in a room full of hearing, it would be quite overwhelming. They've offered to book me interpreters to be able to join that, and it's a great service and they are thinking of me, but I just think it would be quite overwhelming. It would be better if there were other deaf parents there and we could maybe go together, but just for me to be on my own, it would be nice to have somebody as a bit more company rather than me feeling in this room with all these hearing people. You know, I would be paranoid, are they understanding me? They don't really have the same empathy with the type of barriers that I face or the type of barriers my children face. So I think if there was other deaf parents there, we'd be able to support each other because we have that empathy. So I have said no to those requests or invitations. So I have been asked, but I've not joined.
Okay. And I'm wondering if any of the other parents have gotten involved. Are you just the only deaf?
As far as I'm aware, I'm the only deaf person in our school, a deaf parent in our school. So, you know, you can't really, it's a tricky.
That is difficult, isn't it? I can see the dilemma. But it's great that they've offered you interpreters and things, but I can certainly understand your personal position on that. Yeah. Okay, moving on then. I wonder if you have any tips for deaf parents, perhaps people who are expecting a child at the moment, or any tips for deaf parents, you know, in relation to education?
I think my advice would be to make sure you understand what GIRFEC is, Get It Right for Every Child. That's really worth knowing and understanding. It's the Get It Right for Every Child framework. I learned that through the BDA. They had set a course up a number of years ago and I went along to learn more about it. And my goodness, what an eye-opener it was. I realised that my child had so many rights to access education in his own language, but also we learned about the Shinari wheel this year.
Okay. Lovely.
So it's a wheel and yeah, it was really useful.
That seems very important. So let's have a look at that in closer detail, if we can call up a photograph of that. Okay, it doesn't look like it's coming. So if you could hold it up to the screen for us. Thank you. And we can see Shinari written at the bottom of there. Okay.
Yeah, so really...
Here it is.
Here we are.
So can you talk to us a little bit more about that wheel that we've just seen, Natalie?
Yes, so every child can be involved in GIRFEC, so it's to make sure that they're included in every aspect of that Shinari wheel. So you've got safe, you've got health, you've got nurtured, etc., around the wheel. So the schools have responsibility to make sure every part of that circle is covered. So if there's one missing, for example, they're not safe, or maybe a child has a problem in their area, like my son, for example, becomes very overwhelmed from time to time. How do they put support in place for that? So they would meet with me, we'd meet with the school, we'd try and figure out what we can do. So for example, my son has a room, a breakout room he can go to. It's a safe room. So when he feels overwhelmed, he can go out to that room, and then when he feels better, he can go back to class. I would like to think BDA might set up that course again for new parents because it was so informative. That really helped me understand that, you know, I can fight for my child's rights. I can make sure that they've got the right support in place. And that's really, really important.
Wonderful. So let's hope the BDA does set up that course because, as you say, it seems to have been very useful. Yeah, it seems to be a good course of parents.
I feel for me, when my son was born, I thought I had good knowledge. I'm a deaf person myself. I've been through school. I have a good understanding. When my son started nursery, my goodness, everything was so different from when I was back in school. Everything was new curriculum, new way of doing things. Going along to the BDA and having that, I felt really empowered to be
And
able
it's
to
important to
fight
be
for the rights of my
empowered.
child.
Yeah.
When my son started nursery, I really wasn't sure what my rights were and what I should fight for and what I shouldn't, what I'm not able to. And so it was really good having that and being able to understand, and me being able to go to the nursery and say, no, look at this here. I know that these things are important. It's really important you work with the school because it's about working together as a team. That's really important. Those compromises, you want your child to have this, but the school need to provide that. And so, you just have to think what's going to work for your child.
So your child has a right of access to real education. That's a right. So I'm happy to see that, people are learning that legal framework, because it's really important that we make sure that those rights are met. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. And that's just made me think, actually, that, well, I'm wondering, do you get kind of sign language, or what would you like to see more of?
I'm lucky because my teacher of the deaf for my son uses sign language, and at a high level. So it's not, a level 1 basic, the teachers of the deaf, and historically sometimes they don't have the best access to sign language, but I had no concerns with my teachers of the deaf.
Oh, that's good.
And that's really important. You need to make sure they've got a good level of language acquisition to be able to work with you.
That's great, because it's so important, isn't it, to have that relationship with the child through sign language.
Definitely.
So when you were back at school, did you have role models like, teachers of the deaf, like your child has at the moment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Kristers.
I was going to say, my school did have a kind of deaf liaison officer. So there was a kind of presence of deaf culture, but we weren't getting that through the teacher of the deaf, I have to say. And that was here in this country, right? So we need more teachers of the deaf who can, yes, I think we need more teachers of the deaf who are good signers and who can relate to the children, and who the children can look up to and, be excited to be in the classroom with. Natalie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just, looking back, remember, obviously I was at school a very, very long time ago. But when I started school, I didn't sign until a deaf teacher came to the school. And to this day, I still remember that person. And all of a sudden, my eyes were opened. I'd never seen another deaf person. And suddenly I was introduced to somebody who was the same as me. And I still keep in touch. A fabulous person, taught me to use British Sign Language. I mean, really, I have so much respect, and, I'll never forget them, because, I remember it. I still remember it, and he remembers me.
And that relationship is so important, isn't it? Because it informs your own identity, because before that, you kind of, you're not sure who you are. So you can tell it was such a profound and formative experience for you. My primary school, the teachers of the deaf were great. They were very supportive and they signed, but there weren't any other deaf children. So, but I'm still in touch with a lot of them. But when I moved school, my parents were very keen on getting a deaf role model for me, and they approached the council, and I had a tutor who came to my home, and I'm still in touch with that person. Yeah. That really is my deaf role model, who really helped me and guided me through education, taught me to sign. And that's really where I got that connection from. That was so important for me. So between the teachers, my parents, and that role model, I think I found my way. And it's really important that children are surrounded by those kinds of structures, I think.
Definitely.
Okay, so Natalie, I'm going to come back to you. We've talked about a number of things, and we've talked about your children. I'm interested in the question of empowering your children. You know, what works well to empower your children in the education system?
So the school, I've never had to challenge the school to provide access. I'm very lucky. The school have been extremely supportive. For example, parents' evening, if I want to go to school shows, anything at all, I don't have to ask them to book interpreters. If I go and I say, oh, there's a, yeah, don't worry, the interpreter's been booked. It's absolutely fantastic.
That's a great model. Yeah.
Yeah, for example, tomorrow, I'm going on a school trip. And they said, oh, do you want, they said that they would provide an interpreter so that I can go along and be a parent helper. And they emailed me to let me go. They were trying to find an interpreter, and I didn't expect one. I didn't expect that. I thought just go along as a parent helper, but they're actually going to provide an interpreter. And it's a great relationship, and it helps to empower me and empower my son, knowing that we have that access without having to challenge, without having to, ask. It's great teamwork.
Yeah, that is great.
During COVID, during lockdown, the parents' evenings were done through like telephone, and obviously difficult for me as a deaf person, how to access the interpreters. And so the Teams system, Microsoft Teams, was horrendous. So they then offered that I could go to the school. We'd use a very large room. They got an interpreter. That was great that they thought, there are other things we can do to provide access. So it was really fantastic.
That is important, isn't it? Because it's important to consider how deaf parents get access to the kind of provision that's made for hearing parents. And also, you have to consider what works for you and for the children as well, right?
Exactly. And I feel I have equality. I feel like I am equal to those hearing parents. I go on the same days. I don't need to wait. Other deaf parents think, oh, I can't go because I don't have an interpreter, or there's a delay in me getting to the parents' evening or whatever. I don't have that. The interpreter's already booked. I'm going in the same day as everybody else. There's no issues.
That's great. That's great. Can I ask though, what are your kind of hopes for the future in terms of, what you'd like to see nationally across Scotland in education?
At the moment, what I would say is there's not enough, there's the numbers of deaf children are really small in the schools. I would like to see a larger number of deaf children in school together, for example, where do I send my son when I think about secondary? So we have to go to a lot of youth clubs, etc., just to make sure my son meets other deaf children. But in school, he's not getting that same opportunity. And so that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see like more deaf children together within a school. I know that my area had been arranging, well, I think from about 5 to like 8 or 9 or something, a meetup. So deaf children from all other schools come along and they all have a meetup.
That's good.
But it's like once every few months or once a month. But it'd be lovely if we could have a more regular meetup for those young deaf children to meet one another. And then they would know they're not the only one, because, my son, if I think about my son, when he was in mainstream, or when I was in school, we had a lot of other deaf BSL users. And so when you see children being quite isolated, it'd be good to let them have that opportunity to be together in one place. That's what I would like to see.
Definitely. It's lovely. Thank you. That's a lovely vision for the future. And definitely, I think that, that's something that I would agree with. I mean, certainly my parents, I think, were concerned about that for me. And it was only, thankfully, when I got to a school that had a deaf unit, that there were other deaf people I could socialize with and be friends with and sign with. But yeah, I think the numbers in terms of deaf people together in a school are definitely falling, aren't they? And those opportunities to have a cohort of deaf children all signing together are reduced. Kristers, did you have deaf people in school with you? Yeah, my parents really tried to encourage me to get involved and to get more deaf children around me. And because it's important, isn't it, to form friendships that you can carry on into the future. So you need to have that. Thankfully, we found a school that provided that for me. So there was a kind of cohort, and a good teacher of the deaf as well. So we were very lucky.
My son recently, he realised that he was different. He would always go along to school, but when at Deaf Club, he just mixes and integrates, no bother at all. And the other children in school, the hearing children, are learning to sign, but he himself, he is starting to see the differences and have that awareness and understanding that, you don't maybe totally understand what I'm saying to you.
Cool. And it's a journey, isn't it? As you get older, when you begin to understand yourself and develop your deaf identity. So it's really important to have that, and for deaf children to come together and have that kind of experience in school or elsewhere, just to identify with other children who are the same as you is so important. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Natalie.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, at the moment, the school have clubs, and they've offered to book an interpreter for my son to be able to access the clubs.
That's great.
But my son doesn't, I think because they're all hearing, he just doesn't want to go. And I understand that. I understand why he feels that way. Hopefully one day there'll be more.
You don't think he'd try it out?
I don't know if that'll happen. And I can't force him, because that would really dent his confidence. And so, yeah, we'll go along to our deaf clubs, etc. But it would be nice if he was able to go to the after school clubs, etc. Hopefully in the future that's something that will happen. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. That was really great. I don't think we have any questions from our audience yet, but just to remind viewers, you are very welcome to send in any questions or comments, and we'll respond to them as and when we receive them. I just want to draw our attention to the BSL Scotland Act of 2015. And obviously, it talks about provision from nursery right through the education system. And there is provision here for parents, and particularly at points of transition from nursery to primary. What's your experience of that been, Natalie?
I mean, what I would stress again is the importance of GIRFEC, get it right for every child. Try and meet with other parents who have children, because, that's where that cross exchange will happen of information. It's important that you make sure you're taking your children to deaf clubs, whatever's out there. Go to these clubs, let them meet other children, you meet other parents. Like I say earlier, I thought I knew everything. I'm deaf, I've been through school, I know. But my experience was, wow, actually, I don't know everything. And I had to really work at finding out that information. So it's important to meet other parents.
I guess we're all still learning every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in secondary school, I think I'll be, when my son goes to secondary school, he's still too young at the moment, but I'm already thinking it's going to be a new journey for me and how that's going to work.
And in relation to secondary school, have you been thinking about what secondary schools might work for your son? Have you been thinking about that provision yet?
I think my concern would be what is out there for him. Okay, so, I remember there was always deaf schools, deaf bases when I was at school, but now I don't know what's there. So I'll have to see, what are the choices? So is there schools with deaf bases, or what are our choices and our options? So with secondary school, I just don't know what's out there. Again, I would probably want to meet with parents who have children who've been in secondary school and have a chat with them. That's why I think it's good to make sure you have that ability to meet with others and share knowledge.
Definitely.
But what was your secondary experience like? Was it good?
Well, Kristers, do you want to come back on that first? My secondary school experience, I think, has been going really well. It started off okay. There were a few glitches, occasions where we identified that I needed a bit more support, that I was kind of struggling a little bit because I was in the majority of hearing children. But as things progressed, I got used to that feeling, and it's been okay.
There's always those teething problems, isn't there, when you first start?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's always room for improvement, isn't there? I mean, my experience of school was similar to Kristers. When I first got there, it was a bit difficult. The deaf unit was very small, a tiny little microcosm in this wider school. So most of the children were hearing. There was sign around, so I could sign with others, no problem. But it felt, I don't know, it didn't feel like it was my school. Then I went along to a second school with a larger deaf unit. And that felt better because I had more variety of people to meet with, more sign language available to me. And the teachers of the deaf, I have to say, were fabulous. They signed really well. So their education was great. The exams were good. So it was important for me to have that tuition in my own language so that I could do exams in my own language. And that felt useful to me. And yeah, it was great. So a good school experience for me.
Oh, it sounds all right. And generally, it sounds positive.
Oh, yes, more positive than not.
You were saying about exams. Do you feel that you got support through your exam stage, like for translation, etc.? If I think back in my time, I got extra time and we were able to request a separate room. But I'm just wondering if it's still the same. Is the sport still the same? Because, you know, the sport was great back then, but I'm just wondering, is that still there? Or what do you get sport-wise when it comes to, the exam diet? What happens there?
Well, I'm going through that at the moment. It's exam period just now. So I'm not sure. I'm kind of feeling 50-50, in terms of confidence, but I have got a camera provided so that I can answer in BSL if I don't feel comfortable writing answers in English. So that provision is made. And at the same time, you get 25% or 50% extra time. So for Nat 5s, you get 25%, for Highers 50. What do you mean?
What do you mean by that? 50, 25, what?
Oh, should I come back on that? So you're given. I was given a number of kind of support options. So the 25% and 50% are related to exam time. So with your Nat 5s, it's kind of similar to the kind of part 2s and part 1s that you did in your day. So they're usually about an hour or something. So say if you had an hour-long exam paper, your 25% extra time would mean you get an extra 15 minutes. So your exam in total would be 1 hour and 15 minutes.
I see.
And so with the Highers, you get 50%. So higher exams are usually about 2 hours if it's a written paper, something like that. So you can opt for your 50% extra, which means you'd get 3 hours to do the same paper. So you get time to absorb the questions, to translate the questions, to make sure you understand the translation, and then to answer the questions. As I said before, my option was to answer in BSL to a kind of video camera. So I thought that was great. It just saved my arm muscles writing all those papers, but also I was able to answer in my own language. Some schools offer a private room as well, so you're able to do that separately so that you can work to the camera in a separate room without people watching you. And also the tutor will kind of translate the exam question so that you're sure that you understand what the question is. So there's quite a lot of support available, quite a lot of provision.
That's actually fantastic. That reduces my anxiety about exam time, so it's good to get the extra time. And thanks for explaining the 25%, 50%.
You're welcome.
Extra time.
I think that kind of support is bound to be ongoing. I'm sure it's going to be available when your child gets there.
I was talking about after school clubs. Did you ever access any after school clubs? Did you get support to do that, or what happened?
At primary school, I got involved in quite a lot of clubs. I used to go to art club. I used to love art club. But I can remember the first time I went, I felt like, at that time there was no interpreter there. I had to ask for an interpreter. It was a bit last minute, I think, so they hadn't found one. But they brought in a deaf tutor. So I was happy with that. And I felt a bit guilty because they were sort of working for free, doing that work for me. So I just feel a bit guilty about going back to the to an after school club. But I did enjoy the club, and I met I made a lot of hearing friends through art club because we were creating art together. So that was really nice. So I don't remember going to more clubs at secondary school, though, not too much. Well, yeah, I did some clubs and I had some support. So, an interpreter was provided, but I was a bit the same. I felt a bit guilty. Some clubs didn't offer any kind of support, so that was a bit disappointing. So I had to just kind of get on with it myself and just try and follow visually. It's not such a great experience, really. But I did enjoy the more practical ones. But the ones where there was no provision and there was quite a lot of talking, it was quite difficult to follow. And teachers weren't always confident about how to communicate. So that's an area that I'd like to see more provision in, more interpreters providing at clubs so that deaf people can just go along and join in the club and feel welcome.
Yeah, that's my concern. Definitely my concern.
What about your son? Any after school activity going on there?
Yeah,
Are they keen?
There are some, but he doesn't really seem overly fussed about it. I think if he was able to go and see himself, he might want to join in, but he's not overly keen to go along and have a look, so it's not particularly easy.
Okay. Kristers, do you have any more questions for Natalie? Yeah, I was wondering, when you started school, when your deaf child started school, did you as parents get a lot of support for that journey, really?
When we started thinking about schools and what was out there, and also with nursery, we always got interpreters booked for any meetings we went to, for any visits, and there was always interpreters provided. We didn't have to bother arguing or fighting to get that provision, they just did it.
And so parents' night, you get all the papers and Christmas plays and sports day and all of those kind of things?
For everything.
Wow, great.
Absolutely everything.
That's brilliant.
There's no issues with communication barriers at all. I can't remember, I think it was like last year or something, it was a last minute parents meeting. It was like an informal tea, coffee type thing. And I went along. There was no interpreter, but I didn't expect one with it being last minute. But they came in, and they said, you should have let us know you were coming. We would have made sure we booked an interpreter. And I said, it was last minute, but it was really nice that they gave me that choice.
That's great, yeah.
So I don't feel there's any barriers. When I did visit the schools, when we were trying to decide which school my son would go to, we got interpreters provided for any of the visits that we went on, which allowed us to ask questions. I remember one school that we went to, were really lovely and they explained everything, but they said there's no BSL in the school. And, I think I said, do you know about BSL, do you know about the BDA, etc. And I went to another school and they said, we're committed to BSL, we do that. And that's what swayed my decision, because one school wasn't particularly strong with BSL and the other was.
Yeah, decision made. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was able to pick the right place for my son. If there were more deaf children, it would be perfect. But I don't have any barriers in being included for my son. I know for me as a parent, I don't have any barriers. A bit different for my son, but not for me.
Yeah, back in my time, I think, I mean, my school were wonderful. They provided all sorts of things for my parents. And my parents, of course, are hearing, so it's a different situation. But I remember kind of back in my day, like parents' evening or school play or sports day, there was no interpreter provided. We did have to kind of push for that. So I think if there had been provision available, we would have wanted that. So that's fabulous to hear that you're having that experience now. That's great.
Yeah, so I wonder then, with both of your schools, for like school reports, parents' evenings, your parents would go along to that? Were interpreters booked for you, or did your parents have to go along and not be able to understand what was happening, or you weren't able to understand?
Well, my parents kind of got the reports and all of those kinds of things. And they would bring someone in, but not necessarily a qualified interpreter, more like a sort of support worker, to kind of sign
And were
the
you able to
communication.
understand properly?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Yeah, it wasn't bad. I think it was nice to have some kind of signing support, so it was available.
Yeah. What about you, Erin?
My secondary school, I didn't get involved too much in parents' evenings. I just let my parents get on with that, and they would tell me about it when they got home, you know. But looking back, you know, in retrospect, you know, that's my education, so I think it would have been good to have been involved. But I don't feel like I was neglected in the sense, because we got our reports. My parents, you know, always fed back from parents' evening. We would go through the reports together. You know, and my teachers always said, you know, if there's anything in the report that you don't understand, let us know and we can translate that. So I think I was still involved in that. You know, I was able to access the language of my school reports and so on. So that was good. I think we've got a question come in from our audience just now. We should be able to see that on screen. We've got a question from Linda Richards. I think that's coming up on screen now. Linda says, hi, Natalie. It's a long question. I'll try and summarize it. Understand about not getting involved in school groups with parents, etc. Rather than say the school, no, you know, I'm not going to go. Maybe you could say, you know, we could get involved in a group and give the deaf perspective. You know, we haven't been able to get involved in groups because the deaf perspective, and maybe that would help other parents to understand and perhaps involve your children in school activities a little bit more. So that's kind of an interesting suggestion. Do you have an answer to that, Natalie?
That's interesting, because it did cross my mind. Should I go to the school? Should I do that? Should I provide some of my lived experience and maybe talk about who I am as a deaf parent? When I go to pick up my children, it tends to be that nobody really chats to me. I would love to chat to the other parents, but it's very difficult to do that, and it affects my confidence. I don't feel overly confident to do that. And growing up, I was very much in the hearing community, but I just don't have the confidence when I go to school. And I think as long as that's my aim, that my child has the support they need. That's the biggest aim. But I get your suggestion, and I think it's a good suggestion that, you know, to try and make maybe other parents understand what it's like to maybe interact with a deaf parent and a deaf child. Good suggestion.
Yeah, that kind of feedback and that sort of awareness, I think, might be quite empowering, because when those parents are at home, they could talk to their children about how to communicate with your children. And, you know, it's a kind of community education, isn't it, rather than a sort of direct approach. I think that's a great idea.
Definitely.
So maybe when next time the school says to you, Natalie, would you like to get involved? Maybe you won't say no. Maybe you'll take that on. And I'm sure the school, I think they've been very supportive, haven't they? So perhaps in the future you might want to get involved.
It's my own confidence, I think, more than anything.
And what about transitions to other schools, you know, high school and so on? What's the parents' perspective on that? I'm wondering. How does that feel for you?
Well, at the moment, secondary schools are not really on the radar. We're still in the dark about that. We don't really know what's out there. You know, my son's 7 now. He's halfway to getting to high school, secondary school. But, you know, I think we'll probably take more of a keen interest in the coming years. But certainly I would want to go and speak to other parents with deaf children from my area and find out what their experiences are and see what the most positive comments are coming back. But at the moment, I just don't know at the moment.
And when your son gets old enough and you're going on these kind of visits, what are you hoping that experience is going to be like? What would you like to see in that transition phase?
Well, again, my aim, I think, is socialisation. You know, when they go to the secondary school, you know, it's all about having friends. That's so important to them. They're teenagers and they want to have friends. So if there are a good number of other deaf children there, I think that would be my biggest relief to have that. So, you know, having full-time support with a good number of deaf children, I think would be my aim. And I think if I got that, I would feel really happy.
That's terrific. And so you'd be looking for full-time support and you'd be looking for a deaf peer group, really. And both of those are very important, aren't they?
Definitely.
I think we're kind of drawing to a close, but before we do end proceedings, I just want to ask you, Natalie, have you got any tips that you'd like to share with any parents watching, parents of deaf or hearing children, really?
Just as I said before, research, 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 meet other parents, find out what organisations are out there to give you support, find, you know, like GIRFEC, for example, we were talking about earlier, find out what your rights are, make sure you understand, go along to courses, hopefully be able to set up another course to do with GIRFEC, find out about your rights, feel empowered so that you can challenge, because it's your child and your child has a right to access in their language, they have a right.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you do have to meet those challenges to get those rights seen and deserved.
And the BSL Act 2015 is a really useful tool in supporting that and really empowering parents with that. Kristers, did you want to come back? I thought that was a lovely tip. Thank you. And I'd just like to say thank you so much, Natalie, for coming along and sharing your experience with us, because I think this has been a really useful and important discussion. And thank you for answering those questions and
thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for your time. Thank you so much, folks.
Bye now.
Bye.